I'm an artist and designer specialized in creating database artworks. And so I work on self-initiated projects as well as commissions. I also work with a small creative technology team on a daily basis. But tonight I'm going to talk about some database artworks of mine that are most characteristic to my practice. And so the first one is called Almost Everyone. That is a crucial point. That was a crucial point in my journey in data visualization. That it was right after my kids were born. I started my doctoral studies in Budapest at the Mohyly Nagy University of Art and Design. And so this is when I started also to focus on data physicalization as an artistic tool and started my own path. And this was the first project that was especially addressed data physicalization simultaneously or aiming at communicating a social topic that was interesting to me. And my context, or because of my context as a fresh mother, I turned my attention to the situation of childbirth in Hungary, which was I previously confronted as a mother, as I mentioned. And so I learned that the number of interventions during labor is very high in Hungary. And I consulted midwives and my doctor and other activists in the area. And so I had to learn that these interventions are really high. And I collected data from between 2012 and 2016. And so what I came about at the end was an aggregated number of the episiotomy and C-section rates, which are both very high and both are cut-based interventions. And that mounts up to 77% of all delivery in Hungary between these times. So my aim was to represent this situation. And the idea of using a stick came from our walks with my son, who used to collect those sticks. And so those branches, and the installation title is Almost Everyone, because I wanted to highlight the fact that the majority of women who give birth has this wound, which is invisible to the society. And I found the quick tie a very, very strong sign to represent this wound women bear, and which is actually not visible. So I wanted to make it very visible. And when you entered the space and looked at the installation, you could have this experience or impression that all branches, all twigs are equipped with these quick ties to explicitly say that almost all women are affected. And so I like this last shot of the installation with my kids, who are, of course, much bigger now. And then I can now jump to a new project. And also, it was a big step for me. A couple of years passed since I did Almost Everyone. I was awarded a Fulbright scholarship, which I spent in Boston at the Barabashi Lab Network Science Institute. And so this was the first time for me in a science lab. And since being in a science research lab was new to me, I spent my early days talking to everyone around me about their background and actual project. Also started to audit an introductory course to network science. And so somehow this idea born into my mind that what if I try to visualize the network of a network science lab? And so I started to take notes and question the people around me, as I mentioned. And then I realized that my method so far is not exactly suitable for a network visualization, or not exactly the way how network scientists work. So I learned from my colleagues, and with the kind assistance of some of them, I collected data with the help of an appropriate script, and then I turned them into real networks. And I was not only curious of the networks, but also the nodes, so the people and how their relations are within the lab. So my interest was about their work relations and social relations, and whether they have both with some colleagues. And so in parallel of this whole research, I also started to test different materials, how I could represent this desktop-based visualization in my own ways. And so finally, the piece I built was made out of very simple and nice materials, paper and balsa tree. And also, I have to explain that what I learned in the course of the project was that I have to made a consideration which aspect of the network visualization I'm gonna show. And the final piece I built there in Boston, I focused on in the network, so I used, if two people at the lab are both connected work-related and socially as well, I represent the stronger connection between them. And so here you can see some shots of how I made up all the nodes, and sometimes I asked the persons represented to make their own nodes. So you can see a friend, Daria, who is a fantastic graphic designer at the lab, and she also built her own node, which I could include in this site-specific installation. Here you can see the final network. And so the brown paper, just to add, represents the social connection between people, and the white represents the work connection. And you could see previously Daria Koshkina, and interestingly, a couple months later, when we talked to each other on the phone, she made me realize that I often represent or work on pieces that are around people or problems that are somehow related to people. And this is also true for these recent projects from this spring. This project is called 4960/360. And this project was realized in Budapest, but it also roots back to Boston, where I met an artist, a historian called Alexandra M. Szabo. And so she is part of an interdisciplinary research team called Digital Lens. She's not on the photo, but some of the members are. And they conducted the research on the early testimonies of Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivors taken by volunteers right after they arrived back to Budapest. And so besides the scientific papers and their findings on the deportation routes, they concluded this research in the framework of an exhibition. And I was asked to join in with an artistic contribution. And I did this. I have to mention that I participated this project also because my grandmother was a survivor. So the installation I created is based on the unprocessable proportion of survivors and people who died during the deportation and in concentration camps. So I took the data of her hometown in Hungary, the number of people in the Jewish community in Sátoraljaújhely, a relatively small town, before the Holocaust and after the Second World War. And so what you can see is that the longer threads represent the people who survived, and the so many shorter threads represent all the people who died, and some other shots. And the last bit of the second half of my talk, I'm gonna tell about two projects. I've spent hundreds of hours, literally, in the last couple of years. This project was developed in a duo, so I worked with another artist called Mátyás Husz, and it was commissioned work by the Museum of Ethnography in Budapest, and part of their new permanent exhibition that was inaugurated actually a little more than 1 month ago. So we came up with the idea of building a physical diagram to represent the growth of the museum collection in over 150 years. And what you can see here is that the smaller wing represents the growth of the object collection, about 250,000 objects, and the taller wing shows the archive collection with 600,000 of items. And the vertical poles hold the sculpture, but also represent important points in the story of the museum. And the bases, what you can see, I will show you photos of the actual sculpture. Just it's worth to explain in advance that so the basis also represents data. It's the different venues of the museum from these 150 years. And so for the diagram, we learned that there is no such data set at the museum that would summarize the growth. So we had to build it ourselves. And we came up with a kind of big data set. And so I will show you some photos of the actual sculpture, like how we built the diagram by hand, each piece. These are the pieces or the slides of the diagram. Sorry. And then how we mixed the color painting to cover the slides, because I have to also tell that it's oil painted. So we painted each slides with oil, and then we carved lines in the colors to represent the objects themselves. So one line is about 100 objects. And here you can see the final sculpture, which is quite big. So the tallest point is 4 meters high. And this is the archive side, because it has, as you have seen it has two sides. So this is the gray is the archive side, and then the little labels explains the pose, like what happened in certain times of the museum's life. Another shot from the archive point of view, and from close up you can see the lines and how the structure is set up. And then this is the object collection, which with so many object collection within the big collection. So the colors represent different sub collections like furniture or Asia or Indonesia and so on. And it's one of my favorite shot, a close up from the sub collections and the lines. And so while this other piece was concentrating on the whole collection, or a collection as a whole, this other piece on the wall, we built on the wall, is focusing on the object, where each oak element represents an artifact, and their measurements, I mean the oak elements measurements, reflects their pre and museum life. So the taller the element, the longer it has been in the museum, and while the shadow represent the age of the objects. This is a shot when we prepared the oak elements, polished them, and soothed it in oil, and this is how it looks like on the wall. And this is also enhanced with the projection. So in the middle there is an area to project, where there is a preset series of questions that ask things about the museum collection, and also with the lights the question are answered, and they light up several objects that are related to the question, or that are the answer to the question. And so there are generic questions, and also we go into details and more specific questions, and we arrive to one specific objects, and then we can also see with the drawing these objects. I don't know how many minutes I do have yet, but so this is a piece that combines physicalization but also digital technology or projection. And the last thing I wanted to show is a very recent and playful small project I made for the IDC conference in Hilversum, early October. So basically I played with colors and lights, and I was asked to make this pop-up visualization for the conference day, and I decided to represent the visitors, like the attendees, their backgrounds and their expertise. So I asked them to select a color that represents their background, for example, designer or data scientist or someone from the public sector. And so they all put their circles on this board, and then finally we arrived to a kind of nice and simple visualization of the attendees' background, and the whole, like a panorama or an overview of the attendees.